The ink on the letter had faded, but the words still burned in Clara Whitmore's heart. If you were honest, kind, and willing to start anew, it read, you will find a home and a husband at Dust Creek Ranch, W. Kane. She had read it so many times she could almost hear the man's voice now, deep and steady, like a promise whispered through time. Clara folded the letter one last time and slipped it into her small carpetbag beside a Bible, 2 calico dresses, and a locket that no longer held anyone's picture. The boarding house matron called out that the train for New Mexico Territory would leave in 10 minutes. Clara took a breath so deep it hurt her ribs. Are you sure, dear? The matron asked kindly. You don't know this man. Mail-order marriages can be dangerous. Clara finished softly. Yes, but so is staying. The matron nodded. Everyone in town knew what Clara was running from. The cruel cousin who'd inherited her late father's estate and treated her more like property than kin. Dust Creek might be 1,000 miles away, but to Clara, it sounded like freedom. The train roared and hissed, a beast of iron and smoke. When she climbed aboard, her gloved hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped her ticket. A porter helped her into a seat by the window. The landscape blurred from green fields to brown plains as days passed in a rhythm of rattling wheels, burnt coffee, and whispered prayers. At night, she'd rest her head against the glass and imagine the man who had written that simple, steady letter, Mr. Wyatt Kane. She pictured him as a gentleman, maybe a little older, maybe weathered by work and sun, but kind. He had to be kind. The letter had been too plain, too honest to come from a liar. Still, fear lingered like a shadow. What if he was cruel beneath that polite handwriting? What if he only wanted a servant or worse? When the train finally screeched into Dust Creek Station, Clara's heart thudded so hard she felt faint. She smoothed her skirt, tugged her bonnet lower, and stepped down into the blinding sun. The west hit her like a wave heat, dust, horses, and the scent of sage. The platform bustled with men in worn hats and boots, their voices low and rough. She gripped her carpetbag tighter. Then she saw him. A tall man leaned against a post at the edge of the platform, arms crossed, hat shading his eyes. A tan duster coat fluttered in the wind, and a revolver rested at his hip. But it wasn't the gun that caught her, it was his smile. Slow, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world to wait for her to trust him. Miss Whitmore. His voice carried easily over the noise. She nodded, unable to speak. He tipped his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with sun. Wyatt Kane. You made it. Ah yes, she stammered. The journey was long. Reckon it was. His gaze softened when he noticed her trembling hands. Don't worry, darlin'. Dust Creek looks harsh at first, but it's got a gentle heart once you get used to it. Darlin'? The word startled her. Was too warm, too easy, but it didn't sound mocking. She swallowed hard. I'll try to get used to it, Mr. Kane. He smiled again, faintly amused. Wyatt'll do. She followed him to a buckboard wagon hitched with 2 chestnut horses. As he helped her up, his rough hand brushed her gloved one, and she felt an unexpected jolt, not fear, but something dangerously close to comfort. The wheels rolled over the dirt road, past endless golden plains and the distant shimmer of mountains. For a while, neither spoke. Then Wyatt broke the silence. You're quiet, he said gently. Most folks talk a lot when they're scared. I don't see much point, she murmured, watching the horizon. Talking never kept me safe before. Wyatt's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly, as though he understood too well. Fair enough. Then I'll do the talking for a while. You just breathe, Miss Whitmore. She almost smiled. Almost. The sun sank low, setting the sky aflame. Ahead, a wide stretch of land, open fences, windmill, and a white farmhouse framed by cottonwoods. Dust Creek Ranch, her new home. As the wagon stopped, Clara clutched the letter once more. Her fingers trembled, her throat dry. The man beside her looked toward the house, then at her. You'll be safe here, he said quietly. Whatever it is you're running from, no one's gonna hurt you again. Not while I'm alive. His words were steady, but his eyes carried something unspoken, a pain as deep as her own. And though fear still fluttered in her chest, for the first time in years, Clara let herself hope. The first thing Clara noticed as the wagon rolled into Dust Creek was the silence. Not the quiet of peace, but the vast hush of a land too large to care about her trembling heart. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of dry earth and horses. The sun hung low, a blazing orange coin above the horizon. Wyatt Kane guided the wagon past a row of weather-beaten storefronts, a general store, a blacksmith's, a saloon with swinging doors creaking in the wind. A few cowhands leaned against posts, squinting curiously at the stranger in the bonnet beside their boss. Clara ducked her head, her cheeks burning under their gaze. She had never felt so out of place. Her Eastern manners, her lace gloves, her every movement screamed outsider. Wyatt must have noticed her stiff posture. Don't mind them, he said quietly. Town's not used to new faces, especially ones that smile prettier than a sunrise. She startled at the compliment, unsure how to respond. They seem curious. Curious? Yes? Mean? No, he assured. They'll come around. They pulled up before the general store, where a round woman in an apron stepped outside, wiping her hands on a flour-stained cloth. Well, I'll be, she said with a grin. "So here's the lady you wrote me about, Wyatt." "Sure is," he said, climbing down and offering Clara a hand. "Miss Clara Whitmore. This is Mrs. Hattie Dunn. She runs the store and the gossip in equal measure." Hattie laughed heartily. "Ain't that the truth? Welcome to Dust Creek, dear. You poor thing must be half-baked in that dress. Come inside, get yourself a drink before this rascal drives you off to the end of the world." Clara hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Thank you, ma'am. I'd like that." Inside, the store smelled of coffee, leather, and soap. Shelves were stacked with everything from horse tack to canned peaches. Wyatt busied himself collecting supplies while Hattie poured Clara a glass of cool water. "Don't let his quiet fool you," Hattie said in a conspiratorial whisper. "Wyatt Kane's got a good heart. Been alone too long, though. That ranch of his could use a woman's touch, and so could he, if you ask me." Clara blushed, sipping her water quickly. "He's been very kind." "That's a start," Hattie chuckled. "You just keep your head up, dear. Life out here's hard, but kindness has a way of lasting longer than fear." By the time they left the store, the sun was slipping behind the hills, painting the sky in streaks of rose and amber. The ride to the ranch was quieter this time. The land opened wider, the breeze cooler, the road rougher. Clara's thoughts wandered. She watched Wyatt's broad shoulders as he guided the reins, his silence comfortable, unforced. There was something about the way he looked at the land, as if it were a living thing he'd sworn to protect. She wanted to ask him about the letter he'd written, about what made him send for a bride, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, Wyatt spoke first. "You'll see the ranch soon," he said, his tone thoughtful. "It ain't much, but it's home. My folks built it when Dust Creek was nothing but brush and coyotes." "Do you live alone?" she asked softly. "Mostly," he replied. "Got a few hands who help with the cattle, but they keep to themselves. Used to be more folks around." She caught the shadow that crossed his eyes, but didn't press. When the wagon turned off the main road, Clara caught her first glimpse of Dust Creek Ranch's sturdy white farmhouse with a wraparound porch, flanked by cottonwood trees that swayed like slow dancers in the wind. A barn stood nearby, doors open, lantern light flickering within. It wasn't grand, but it felt alive. Wyatt pulled the horses to a stop. "Here we are," he said quietly. Clara stepped down, her boots crunching on the dirt. Crickets sang in the gathering dusk. The air smelled of hay and lilac from the bushes near the porch. He helped her with her carpetbag, then gestured toward the house. "You can rest easy here. There's a room ready for you upstairs. Tomorrow, we'll ride the land. Get you familiar with the place." She nodded, clutching her bag. "Thank you for taking me in." He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled, soft, genuine. "You look like you've been running a long time, Miss Whitmore. You don't have to run here." Her throat tightened. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she whispered, "I hope you're right." He tipped his hat and stepped aside, letting her walk past him into the house. The door creaked as she entered the warm, lamplit room. The wood floors glowed golden in the firelight. Clara turned once, glancing back through the doorway. Wyatt stood silhouetted against the evening sky, hat in hand, the faintest smile on his lips. And though fear still curled in her stomach, a small spark of something new flickered within her, fragile but real. She didn't know yet if Wyatt Kane was a safe man to love, but for the first time in years, she wanted to find out. The next morning dawned clear and golden, as if the night's storm had scrubbed the sky clean. Sunlight streamed through Clara's window, glinting off the dew that sparkled on the pasture grass beyond. She stood for a long while just watching it, the wide, endless land that now held her fate. Downstairs, she heard the clatter of dishes, the low murmur of Wyatt's voice as he spoke to someone outside. She dressed quickly, smoothing her skirts, brushing her hair into a neat twist before descending the stairs. The kitchen smelled of coffee and biscuits. Wyatt sat at the table with a ranch hand, a tall, wiry man with sandy hair and a scar across his cheek. Both looked up as she entered. "Mornin', Miss Whitmore," the ranch hand said with a grin that was more curiosity than charm. "Good morning," she answered softly. "This here's Hank," Wyatt said. "Helps me keep the cattle from running off." Hank tipped his hat. "Pleasure, ma'am. You sure picked a fine day to see Dust Creek proper." Wyatt slid a plate toward her, 2 biscuits, and a few slices of bacon. "Eat up. I'll show you around once you've had something in your stomach." She sat, grateful for the warmth of food and his quiet steadiness. The storm had left her uneasy dreams, but the morning light and Wyatt's calm presence settled her. When breakfast was done, they walked the pastures. The air was sharp with sage and sun-warmed grass. Horses grazed near the fence line, their tails flicking lazily at flies. Clara found herself breathing easier than she had in years. "This place," she said softly, "it feels alive." Wyatt smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening. "It's got a heartbeat all its own. Took me a long time to hear it after well." He trailed off, gaze turning toward the hills. "After what?" she wanted to ask, but something in his tone warned her away. They spent the morning mending a gate and feeding the horses. Wyatt worked with quiet precision, every movement. Sure, he spoke little, but when he did, his voice carried the low warmth of a man who didn't waste words. Clara found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way his shoulders tensed when he thought too long, the way his eyes softened when she smiled. At midday, Wyatt saddled his horse. "Need to ride into town?" he said. "You'll be all right here." "Of course," she replied. "I'll start supper for when you return." He nodded once. "Appreciate that." When he rode off, the house felt suddenly too large, too quiet. Clara wandered through the parlor, dusting shelves and straightening books, until her eyes caught the photograph again, the woman and little boy smiling from years gone by. She hesitated, then lifted the frame gently. There was something written on the back in a woman's graceful hand. "To my Wyatt, the man who makes this wild land feel like home." Clara's chest tightened. She traced the faded ink with her thumb, imagining the woman who'd written it, the wife Wyatt had lost, the child buried on the hill. What kind of man carried that weight and still found the heart to send for another bride? She didn't hear the door open until a voice startled her. "Don't touch that, girl." Clara jumped, nearly dropping the photograph. Standing in the doorway was a heavy-set woman with gray-streaked hair tucked beneath a bonnet. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, took Clara in from head to toe. I'm sorry," Clara stammered. "I didn't mean." The woman waved a dismissive hand. "You must be the new one. I'm Agnes McAllister. Been keeping this ranch in order since before Wyatt could ride a horse. And I've seen more brides come and go in this territory than I care to count." Clara's pulse quickened. "Come and go." Agnes folded her arms. "Some come with gold in their eyes, some with kindness. Most don't last. Wyatt's a good man, but his heart's buried deep. Don't think a pretty face will fix that." "I didn't come to fix him," Clara said quietly. "I just came to start over." Agnes studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll see." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You ever hear folks talk in town about Wyatt's wife? Don't listen to all of it, but don't ignore it, neither." "What do they say?" Clara asked, breath-catching. Agnes sighed. "That she died sudden, that maybe it wasn't fever like he said." The older woman's boots thudded away down the porch steps, leaving Clara frozen where she stood, the photograph still trembling in her hands. Her heart pounded. Wyatt's voice echoed faintly in her mind. "You're safe here, Clara. I'd never hurt what I hoped to protect." But now doubt whispered, just as softly, "What if he already has?" She set the photograph back on the mantel with shaking fingers, the woman's smiling face watching her with secrets she could no longer ignore. Outside, thunder rolled faintly again on the far horizon, and this time, it didn't sound like weather. The storm that Agnes warned of wasn't in the sky, it rode in on the wind. By evening, the light had turned copper and strange, and Dust Creek lay quiet as if holding its breath. Clara had tried to busy herself in the kitchen, baking biscuits, checking the fire, but her thoughts tangled tighter with every sound outside. Wyatt hadn't returned from town yet. She kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see him riding through the dusk. Instead, the first thing she saw was dust, a rising trail from the south road, kicked up by more than one horse. Her heart began to pound. She stepped onto the porch, the warm air heavy with silence. A minute later, 3 riders appeared, their silhouettes black against the dying sun. The one in front wore a dark coat and a wide hat pulled low. The glint of his gun belt caught the last of the light. He stopped a few yards from the porch and dismounted with a lazy grace. "Well now," he drawled, "ain't this a fine welcome home?" Clara froze. "You're on private land," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Mr. Kane isn't here." The man smiled, slow and dangerous. "Oh, I know he ain't, but he'll be along. I always make sure Wyatt finds me." His companions snickered. The leader stepped closer, his boots crunching in the dust. "Name's Jeb Calloway. Maybe you've heard it. Folks in these parts tell a few tales about me and your new husband." Clara's blood went cold. Jeb Calloway. The name was in the whispers Agnes hadn't finished. The outlaw said to have once worked for Wyatt, the same man accused of burning his barn and killing his family before vanishing into the hills. Jeb tipped his hat back, revealing a sharp grin and eyes like cold amber. "You must be the mail-order bride. Pretty little thing, too. He always had tastes." "Get off this land," Clara managed. He laughed, the sound rough as gravel. "Oh, you got fire. I like that. But I came for Wyatt, not for you. Tell him Jeb Calloway's come to collect what's owed. Tell him he can't hide behind his women forever." He swung back into the saddle, spat into the dust, and rode off. His men, following like shadows. Clara stood rooted to the porch, breath shaking, until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the wind. Then she ran inside, bolting the door with trembling hands. An hour later, the door burst open again, but this time it was Wyatt. His hat was dusted white from the trail, his eyes sharp the moment they found her. "What happened?" he demanded. "You all right?" She nodded, but her voice quavered. "There were men here, 3 of them. One called himself Jeb Calloway." Wyatt's face changed hard, pale, carved in stone. "He's alive," he muttered, more to himself than to her. After all this time, Clara's fear deepened. "He said you owed him something, that you were hiding behind women." Wyatt's jaw flexed. He turned away, pacing once across the room, then stopped. "You should have stayed inside. If they come back, I was inside." She interrupted, her voice rising despite the tremor. They came to the porch. I told them to leave. He stopped pacing, looked at her fully. You told Jeb Calloway to leave. I didn't know who he was until he told me, she said. Then I knew enough to be afraid. Wyatt's shoulders eased slightly. You did fine. He drew in a long breath. Jeb used to work this ranch, before everything went bad. He wanted more than wages. He wanted what wasn't his. My wife told him no. Clara swallowed hard. Your wife. His eyes met hers, dark and full of ghosts. He shot her when I wasn't home. Set the house ablaze. Took my boy with the fire. His voice cracked low. I hunted him for months before the trail went cold. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. And now he's come back. Wyatt nodded. Once, he's not after money. He wants to finish what he started. He turned toward the gun rack by the door and pulled down a rifle, checking the chamber with calm precision. I'll deal with him, he said. You stay close to the house. If I'm not back by morning, no, she said, stepping forward. You can't go alone. He looked at her then, something fierce and almost tender flickering behind his guarded expression. Clara, you're brave but this ain't your fight. She held her ground. You said I was safe here. That's your fight and mine now. For a moment, the air between them was taut with fear and stubborn resolve. Then he exhaled and nodded slowly. All right, you stay behind me. And if you hear a shot that don't sound like mine, you run. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying with it the faint echo of distant hoofbeats. Dust Creek was about to remember its ghosts. The moon rose pale and high above Dust Creek, casting silver light over the endless plains. Wyatt Kane led the horses through the cottonwoods, his rifle slung across his shoulder, his movements taut and watchful. Clara followed close behind, the hem of her dress whispering over dry grass, her heart still hammering from the encounter with Jeb Calloway. They stopped near a rocky ridge, overlooking the valley. Wyatt's old hiding place, he said, there half sheltered by stone. They made a small campfire. The flames danced, their orange glow painting his rugged face in flickering light. Clara sat with her knees pulled close, her shawl wrapped tight. The night was cold, but it wasn't the chill that made her tremble. It was the silence between them, heavy with all the things still unsaid. Wyatt broke it first. You handled yourself well today, he said quietly, feeding a stick into the fire. Most women would have fainted seeing a man like Calloway on their porch. I almost did, she admitted, voice soft. But then, I remembered something. What's that? That you smiled when I arrived. She met his eyes across the fire. It made me think, maybe not every man in this world means harm. Wyatt looked down, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. You give a man more credit than he deserves. Maybe, or maybe you just don't see what I see. He was silent again. The fire cracked, and an owl called from the distance. Then, with a sigh, he said, you should know something. Clara, what Calloway told you about my wife. About the fire, it's true. I have figured, she whispered. But I didn't know how to ask. He nodded slowly, his gaze distant, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. Her name was Lila. We were married 5 years. Had a boy, Samuel. Sweet kid used to follow me everywhere, even when I told him not to. Calloway worked for me then. He was good with horses, quick with a gun, too quick maybe. He wanted more. Wanted Lila. He paused, voice roughening. When she refused him, he didn't take it kindly. Came while I was at the trading post. Burned the house. I came back to ashes. Clara felt tears burn behind her eyes. Wyatt. He shook his head. Don't. I've lived with it long enough. Hunted him for a year before I gave up. Built this ranch again from nothing. Swore never to let anyone close. Then the ad for a mail-order bride went out tanned. I almost tore it up when I saw your letter. She blinked. Then why didn't you? Because your letter didn't sound like the others. He glanced at her, something tender beneath his usual steel. Most women wrote about what they wanted: a house, land, security. You wrote about what you feared. Said you didn't want a man who'd break you for sport. Said you were tired of being afraid. Her breath caught. She remembered writing those words late one night, her hands shaking, not really believing anyone would answer. Wyatt looked away again. You were honest. I liked that. The fire snapped, a small ember drifting into the dark. Fear follows me, she said after a moment. I was married once, too. Briefly, he was cruel. When he died, I told myself I'd never depend on another man again. Then my family arranged the match with you. She gave a trembling laugh. I thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life stepping off that train. Wyatt's voice softened. And now? She met his eyes, steady despite the tears. Now I think maybe I needed to come here. Not to escape fear, but to stop letting it rule me. He studied her for a long moment. The wind sighed through the grass. Then, slowly, he reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was rough, warm, and steady. You got more courage than most men I've met, he said quietly. But you're wrong about one thing. What's that? She asked. I ain't the one you should fear anymore. Her heart jumped at the gentle weight of his words. He looked toward the horizon, jaw tight. Calloway won't stop. He'll come again tonight or tomorrow. I can't let him near the ranch again, near you. Then we'll face him together, she said firmly. He looked at her, truly looked. as if weighing the strength behind her trembling voice. Then he nodded once. Together, he agreed. The firelight danced between them, painting warmth where there had been only loss. For the first time, Clara didn't feel like the trembling bride who'd stepped off the train. She felt like something stronger, someone with purpose. Standing beside a man who'd begun to believe in life again. Above them, the stars watched in silence. Somewhere, out in the darkness, a hoarse nada reminder that Jeb Calloway was not far. Tomorrow, Dust Creek would burn bright again one way or another. The first light of dawn crept over the ridge, soft and pale against the vast sweep of the prairie. The fire had long since burned down to glowing embers. Clara hadn't slept much. Every sound in the dark, the rustle of grass, the distant whinny of a horsehead made her tighten her grip on Wyatt's rifle, the weight of fear and determination pressing equally on her chest. Wyatt, ever watchful, had been up since before the first glimmer of light touched the sky. He stood on the edge of the ridge now, scanning the valley below. His silhouette was still a stone, the cold wind tugging at his coat. "Anything?" Clara asked, her voice hoarse from a sleepless night. He shook his head slowly. "Not yet, but he's out there. Calloway's too proud to let the night pass without making a move." Clara rose, brushing the dust from her skirt, and joined him. The valley stretched wide and empty, but it felt wrong, too quiet. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Then Wyatt stiffened. "There," he said, pointing to a stand of juniper down by the dry creek bed. A glint of metal flashed between the branches. Before she could speak, he turned to her, voice low but urgent. "Clara, listen to me. You take the horses and ride for town. Tell Sheriff Barton no." She shook her head firmly, cutting him off. "I'm not leaving you." He gave her a look halfway between anger and worry. "This ain't bravery now, darlin'. This is suicide." She squared her shoulders. "You told me last night we were in this together. I meant it." For a long second, their eyes locked as dark and fierce, hers steady, despite the tremor in her hands. Finally, Wyatt nodded once. "All right, stay low, and when I say run, you run to the rocks and stay down." A gunshot cracked through the stillness before he could say more. The bullet hit the dirt just feet from where Clara stood. She gasped, dropping to the ground as Wyatt fired back in one fluid motion. The air filled with the thunder of gunfire. 3 riders burst from the brush, Jeb Calloway leading the charge, his black coat flaring like a shadow come to life. Wyatt fired again, striking one of the men's horses. It reared, throwing the rider to the ground. Clara clutched the rifle Wyatt had given her, every instinct screaming to hide, but she forced herself to stay where she was. Heart-hammering, Calloway's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and mocking. "You can't win this time, Kane. You took everything from me, now I'm taking her." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She caught Wyatt's glance, brief, fierce, protective. "Over my dead body," he shouted back. "That can be arranged." Another volley of gunfire. Bullets splintered rock and tore through the brush. Clara ducked behind a boulder, her hands shaking so badly she could hardly hold the rifle steady. Then she saw movement to her left, her 4th man, creeping through the sagebrush, aiming at Wyatt from the side. Her breath caught. Wyatt hadn't seen him. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She simply acted. Raising the rifle, she took aim, the way Wyatt had shown her the night before, one eye closed, both hands firm. She squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing across the ridge. The man crumpled before he could fire. Wyatt turned, startled, and saw what she'd done. For an instant, their eyes met across the smoke and sunlight, his full of disbelief, hers wide with shock at her own courage. Then he nodded once, proud and urgent. "Stay down." He turned his rifle toward Calloway, who had dismounted and was advancing now, a revolver gleaming in his hand. "Come on, Wyatt," Calloway shouted. "Let's finish what we started 10 years ago." Wyatt stepped from behind cover, eyes narrowed. "You already did. Now it's my turn." They fired almost at the same time. The sound cracked the morning open like thunder. When the smoke cleared, Calloway stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. His revolver fell into the dust. He dropped to one knee, glaring up at Wyatt. "You should have stayed dead," Wyatt said coldly. Calloway's lips twisted into a sneer, but his strength failed. He fell face first into the dirt, motionless. The gunfire stopped. Silence rolled across the valley again. Wyatt lowered his rifle slowly and turned toward Clara. She was still crouched behind the rock, her hands trembling around the gun. "It's over," he said softly. She blinked, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I shot a man." He knelt beside her, gently taking the rifle from her hands. "You saved my life, Clara." The morning sun broke fully over the ridge, spilling gold light over them both. Wyatt's hand found hers, steady and warm. "You ain't the trembling bride who stepped off that train anymore," he said quietly. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known." Clara looked at him through tears, the fear finally melting away into something far deeper, and as the light spread over Dust Creek, she realized that what his smile had promised all along wasn't danger, it was home. The morning after the ambush carried a silence unlike any Clara had ever known. Not the heavy, fearful kind that followed danger, but a fragile, cleansed, quiet, the kind that comes after a storm finally breaks. The valley smelled of gunpowder and wet earth, for the night had brought a short rain after dawn. The ground around the ridge was dark and damp, the smoke from the fight still clinging faintly to the air. Wyatt stood by the creek bed, his hat in his hands, head bowed. The bodies of Jeb Calloway's men lay covered under canvas, waiting for the sheriff's wagon from Dust Creek. Clara watched from a few paces away, her heart heavy yet strangely light. She'd seen death before, in the years since she'd left her first home, but never death that carried justice. When Wyatt turned toward her, there was no triumph in his eyes, only a deep, quiet weariness. "It's done," he said simply. She nodded. "The sheriff will believe it was self-defense." "He will," Wyatt replied. "Barton knew Calloway was alive. He just didn't have proof. Now he'll have all the proof he needs." Clara looked at him carefully. "And what will you do now that it's over?" He slipped his hat back on, glancing toward the horizon where the sun was rising clean over the hills. "Haven't thought that far. Been chasing ghosts so long, I don't rightly know how to live without him." She stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Then, maybe it's time to stop chasing ghosts and start building something for the living." For the first time in what felt like years, Wyatt smiled softly, almost boyishly. "You make that sound easy, darlin'." "It isn't," she said, her lips curving faintly, but neither was writing that letter. He looked down at her, eyes dark with gratitude, and something warmer that scared and steadied her all at once. "You could have run when the shooting started. Most would have." "I almost did," she confessed, "but I couldn't leave you." He gave a low chuckle, roughened by emotion. "Guess I owe you my life." "You don't owe me," she said. "You gave me something, to a place to belong. Maybe that's worth more than a life." Wyatt's jaw tightened, his eyes glimmering in the light. "You talk like someone who's known loss." "I have," she said simply, "but maybe loss is what teaches us what's worth keeping." By noon, the sheriff's wagon arrived. Sheriff Barton, a thick-set man with kind eyes and a gray beard, climbed down and tipped his hat. "Heard gunfire from the North Ridge," he said. "Figured Kane was in the thick of it again." Wyatt's tone was respectful but firm. "Calloway came for me. I didn't go looking." Barton nodded grimly, glancing at the covered body. "We'll haul him back to town. Write the reports proper. Calloway's been haunting these parts too long. You've done Dust Creek a favor." Clara stepped forward quietly. "Sheriff, Mr. Kane acted only to defend us. I saw it myself." The sheriff gave her a knowing look. "Heard about you, ma'am. The mail-order bride who tamed the loneliest rancher in the valley." Clara flushed, but Wyatt's mouth curved. "Don't go spreading stories, Barton. She's liable to run off if folks make too much noise." "Run off?" Barton chuckled, hitching his belt. "Not likely. After what I heard, woman stood her ground and shot one of Calloway's men clean off his feet." Clara's eyes widened. "How did Barton?" Winked. "Word travels fast when it's worth tailin'." Wyatt's gaze softened as he looked at her. "Seems the whole town's gonna know you saved my hide." She tried to smile but felt her throat tighten. "I didn't do it for fame." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why it means everything." That night, after the sheriff's wagon rolled away and the ranch was still again, Clara and Wyatt sat together on the porch. The stars were out in full bloom, scattered bright and endless above the open plain. Wyatt leaned back in his chair, one hand resting on the armrest close to hers. "I reckon you've got a choice now," he said softly. "You could head east, take what's owed you from Calloway's bounty, start over somewhere quiet." She looked at him, eyes glinting in the starlight. "And leave the only place I've ever felt safe." His brow furrowed. "Safe, safe," she repeated, smiling faintly, "not because it's peaceful but because it's real. Because you're here." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Wyatt reached over and took her hand, gentle, certain. "Clara," he said, voice low and sincere, "I don't know what kind of husband I'll make, but I can promise you this: no more ghosts, no more running. Just this land, this porch, and whatever future you'll let me have with you." Her throat caught. "You already have it." And under the vast western sky, they sat in silence, their hands entwined to souls who had come through fire and fear, finding peace at last, where the dust met the dawn. Spring came early to Dust Creek that year. The hills turned soft and green, dotted with wildflowers, and the cottonwoods shimmered like silver coins in the wind. The townsfolk said the land hadn't looked this alive in a long time, and many whispered it had something to do with the ranch up on Cane Ridge. 6 months had passed since Jeb Calloway's last ride. His name had faded into dust and legend, just another outlaw who got what was coming. But the story that people kept telling, the one that grew with every retelling, wasn't about him, it was about her. The May bride who had arrived with fear in her eyes and left it behind. Under the wide western sky, Clara Kane stood by the corral, her skirts dusted with straw and sunlight. She watched the horses move wild, sleek, and free-step, a rhythm that matched the steady pulse of her own heart. She still woke sometimes with the echoes of gunfire in her dreams. But now, when she opened her eyes, there was always a voice, low, warm, familiar, saying, "It's all right, darlin', you're home, home." She hadn't thought the word would ever belong to her again, but somehow, it did. Wyatt had rebuilt the old barn stronger this time. With her help, She'd insisted on learning to hammer nails and mend fences, and he hadn't argued long. A woman who can shoot straighter than I can, sure as hell can swing a hammer, he'd joked. The ranch thrived again, the cattle fat and healthy, the fields rich with promise. Agnes from the post office visited every week, bringing news and fresh gossip, and often left muttering about how love makes fools of the fiercest. Maybe it did, but Clara didn't mind being that kind of fool. That afternoon, Wyatt rode in from town, dust trailing behind him like a faded ghost of all the miles he'd traveled before he'd found peace. He swung down from his horse and found Clara waiting on the porch, a cup of coffee in her hands. "Didn't expect you back so soon," she said with a teasing smile. He leaned against the porch rail, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Didn't plan to be gone long. Feels wrong, being away from you now." Her heart still fluttered when he said things like that. Not the frightened flutter it used to be, but the kind that made her feel alive, certain, and steady. "Sheriff Barton says he's thinking of hanging up his badge," Wyatt continued, unbuttoning his coat. "Asked if I'd take the job." Clara raised her brows. "You a lawman?" He chuckled, low and easy. "Don't worry. I told him I'm done chasing outlaws. Got too much to lose now." "Good answer," she said softly. Wyatt looked out toward the setting sun, his expression thoughtful. "You know, when you first came here, I didn't think I'd ever smile again. Thought the best parts of me burned away with the past." She stepped closer, slipping her hand into his. "And now," he turned to her, his eyes warm with something deep and unshakable. "Now I smile every day because of you." Her breath caught, and a slow, sweet smile curved her lips. "I used to tremble every time someone raised their voice," she said quietly. "Now I tremble only when you hold me too close." Wyatt grinned, that familiar teasing spark in his eyes. "Darlin', that's one habit I don't mind you keepin'." She laughed light, unguarded, free. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Wyatt pulled her close. The ranch stretched behind them, strong and alive, built not just on soil and sweat, but on something rarer, healing. Clara looked out at the horizon, her head resting against his chest. "Do you ever wonder what the people back east would think?" she murmured, "if they saw us now." Wyatt's voice rumbled low against her hair. "I reckon they'd say that the trembling bride found her strength, and the broken cowboy found his heart." She smiled at that, her eyes glistening. "Then let 'em talk." The wind carried her laughter across the open land, mingling with the sound of the horses, the rustle of the grass, the whisper of everything that had once been lost and now was found. And when she looked up, Wyatt's smile met hers, the same smile that had promised, all those months ago. More than fear. It had promised life, it had promised love, and it had kept its promise. The house creaked with the sounds of settling wood and distant wind. Clara stood just inside the doorway, her gloved hands still gripping the carpetbag as if it might shield her from whatever waited in this new life. Wyatt had shown her briefly around the place, down the narrow hall lined with faded portraits, across the sitting room that smelled faintly of tobacco and pine, and into a modest kitchen where the fire crackled low. Everything was clean but carried the quiet sorrow of a home long emptied of laughter. "This room's yours," he'd said, leading her up the stairs to a small chamber overlooking the west pasture. A white lace curtain fluttered at the window, and on the dresser sat a single vase holding a sprig of wild sage. "It ain't much, but it's safe." Safe. The word echoed in her chest, like a prayer she was too afraid to speak aloud. Now, hours later, she sat on the edge of the narrow bed, bonnet and gloves removed, the lamp's warm glow casting soft light on her pale face. Outside, coyotes yipped in the distance. She tried to steady her breathing, to remind herself she was no longer in that cold house back east, no longer under the cruel thumb of her cousin. And yet, safety was not a feeling she trusted easily. Downstairs, she heard the floorboards creak. Wyatt's footsteps, slow and deliberate. He moved like a man who had long ago learned to carry his weight quietly. Clara rose, drawn to the faint sounds of a world she did not yet know. She found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a kettle steaming on the stove. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "It's quieter than I expected." "Quiet can be loud when you ain't used to it." He poured her a cup of tea and slid it across the table. "Try this. Hattie swears it calms the nerves. I think it just tastes bitter." Clara smiled faintly, grateful for the small humor. She took a cautious sip and nearly coughed at the sharp taste, which made him chuckle softly. "There it is," he said. "A real sound. Not fear, not silence." Her cheeks warmed. "You're teasing me." "Maybe a little. You looked like you needed it." A long moment passed between them, the kind filled with unspoken questions. Then her eyes caught something behind him on the mantel above the hearth. A small framed photograph, its silver edges dulled with age. She rose slowly, setting her cup aside. The photograph showed a woman with dark hair and gentle eyes, seated beside a little boy who looked no older than 6. Both smiled, sunlight in their faces. Clara's breath caught. "Your family." Wyatt's back straightened, his hand resting on the table as if steadying himself. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. Don't be. Been a few years now. Fever took the boy. Then his mama followed soon after. Buried on the hill yonder. The silence that followed was deep and respectful. Clara felt the ache in his words, the way grief hollowed a man but didn't quite kill him. I didn't know, she said softly. Didn't figure you would. It ain't something I put in a marriage notice. Clara turned toward him, her heart tightening. You must think me foolish for coming here, for agreeing to marry a stranger. He shook his head. I think you're brave. Foolish is running from something that don't chase you. Brave is walking toward something that might. Her lips parted, but no words came. His gaze held hers as steady, patient, warm. That same faint smile played at the corners of his mouth, the one that promised nothing but honesty. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the shutters, breaking the moment. Wyatt looked away first. You should rest. We start early tomorrow. Cattle need checking after the storm. Yes, Mr. Kane. Wyatt, he reminded gently. Yes, Wyatt. She turned toward the stairs, her heart thudding with strange new rhythms. As she reached the landing, she paused, glancing back over her shoulder. He stood by the firelight, head bowed slightly, as though listening to voices that no longer spoke. Clara pressed a hand to her chest. The man was a mystery, a stranger still, but there was something in the air of that house. Something raw and unguarded. For the first time, she realized that fear wasn't the only thing making her tremble. It was hope, fragile as the flame flickering downstairs. The wind that night was restless. It clawed at the shutters and howled through the cottonwoods, carrying the lonely song of the prairie. Inside the ranch house, Clara lay beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke, eyes wide open, pulse racing with every groan of the timbers. The room was dark except for the faint flicker of her lamp, the flame dancing like a heartbeat on the nightstand. She had thought she could sleep after that long journey, after the tea Wyatt had offered, after the kindness in his voice. But kindness didn't banish the ghosts of memory, it only gave them quieter corners to hide in. She turned over, clutching the quilt to her chest, listening. Below her, the floorboards creaked. A door shut. Footsteps crossed the hall. The old house seemed to breathe around her. She sat up suddenly when thunder rolled across the sky, distant, but strong enough to rattle the window pane. Lightning flashed, throwing the room into silver and shadow. For an instant, she saw her reflection in the small mirror, pale face, wide eyes, fear she couldn't disguise. The next flash brought something else, a figure in the doorway. Clara gasped and drew back. Then a low voice came, steady and calm. Easy now, Miss Whitmore. It's just me. Wyatt stood there, hat in hand, the lamplight from the hall tracing the lines of his face. His shirt was half-buttoned, sleeves rolled to his forearms, his hair slightly mussed from sleep. I didn't mean to startle you, he said softly. Storm's rolling in hard from the ridge. Thought I'd check the windows, make sure the shutters were latched. Clara pressed a trembling hand to her throat. You frightened me. Reckon I did. He stepped into the room, his boots soft against the floorboards. Didn't mean to. You all right? Yes, she managed. It's just the thunder. He gave a faint smile. Nothing to fear but noise. But I know how noise can sound meaner than it is. Another clap of thunder punctuated his words. The lamp on her nightstand flickered dangerously, then steadied. Wyatt crossed the room, reaching for the window. She caught a whiff of him as he passed leather rain, faint traces of wood smoke. He fastened the latch and turned back toward her. Better? Yes, thank you, he nodded, about to leave, then paused. You shaken, Miss Whitmore. She blinked, realizing her hands trembled slightly where they gripped the quilt. A little. He leaned a shoulder against the doorframe, watching her gently. If it helps any, I don't bite. Her lips parted, startled by the teasing edge in his voice. He saw her blush, and his grin widened just a touch. Not unless I'm invited to, anyway. Her heart gave a wild flutter that wasn't fear at all. She looked away quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. You shouldn't say such things. He chuckled low. Maybe not, but I figure honesty's safer than pretending. You're nervous enough without me acting like a preacher. His tone softened. Truth is, I know you don't trust me yet. I wouldn't either, not if I were you. But I meant what I said. Clariel, be safe here. Her eyes met his. Then, for the first time since stepping off that train, she believed him. Not just because of the words, but because of the way he said them, steady. Certain, like a man used to keeping his word even when it cost him. Thunder boomed again, shaking the shutters. Without thinking, she flinched. He reached out, slow and unthreatening, and rested his hand over hers on the quilt. His touch was warm, grounding, the kind that said you're not alone anymore. She froze, breath caught in her throat but didn't pull away. After a long moment, he withdrew his hand and straightened. Get some rest. Storm'll pass before sunrise. Yes, Wyatt, she murmured. He tipped his hat, that familiar half-smile softening his features. Good night, darling. When he left, the room felt emptier but strangely calmer. She lay back down, the thunder fading to a distant rumble. The warmth of his hand still lingered like a promise on her skin. Clara closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the rain lull her. For the first time in years, she slept without dreaming of escape.